I think you'll find these tools to be positively invaluable as you endeavor to help Holmes solve these cases. Choose an icon to hear a description. Choose this horse and carriage after you have chosen your destination from either your notebook or the directory. It will take you where you want to go. Mr. Holmes' files provide a wealth of information that he has been collecting over the years. Some of it is quite pertinent to the various cases, and some of it offers simply a fascinating and informative sidelight. When you want to access the files, first choose the destination from your notebook or the directory, then choose here when you want to see what relevant information Holmes might already have at hand. The Baker Street Irregulars are an untidy bunch of young street boys who happen to be on the proper side of the law. They have an undeniable knack for bringing back priceless bits of information in a fraction of the time it would take Holmes or myself. When you want to summons them, first choose the destination from your notebook or the directory, then choose the Irregulars. In no time at all, they will return with whatever details they were able to unearth. Choosing this icon puts a notebook at your fingertips. I believe you'll find that your notebook is your greatest detective tool. Use it to keep track of names and places that you believe you might want to investigate. When you do decide upon a person to question or a place to research, first go to your notebook, choose the appropriate name, then choose the horse and carriage. You will be off and running. Because the Baker Street Regulars are often critical to solving a case, I've included them in your notebook. Use them wisely. This gives you access to the London directory. In it, you will find everyone you need to query in your attempt to solve these cases. The directory is also the source for your notebook. You may also use the directory much like your notebook. First, choose your intended destination, then choose the horse and carriage, and you'll have another way to get from one place to the next.
What he found in the Thames, read it in the Times.
Holmes has always claimed that the newspaper is a treasure of information when one can read between the lines. When you are ready to consult the Times, you may of course have a look at your paper copy or simply choose here for a close-up view. When you believe you have directed Holmes to all of the right and proper places, and you have enough information to name the murderer and the motive, choose this icon.
London is not a beautiful city. Under the soot that covers its buildings is a teeming mass of 4 million souls trying to survive, mostly off of each other. You see it in the paper every day. Thankfully, we have the London Times to keep us informed of all these troubling activities with an unbiased eye and razor-sharp accuracy. We find this publication to be of invaluable assistance in our investigations, and I'm sure you will as well. Among the forces of evil which run rampant in this city, there are also, thankfully, two groups of individuals who will aid us in our cause. As we do, they attempt to right wrongs and restore harmony and civility to the streets of London. The first of these groups is a ragtag association of young ruffians. I call them the Baker Street Irregulars. Don't let them fool you. They may be scruffy and ill-bred, but they are on the right side of the law. They can go everywhere, see everything, and overhear everyone. They are my eyes and ears in the streets of London, unquestionably a tremendous asset in our work. They will help us in our investigations if they can. The other group is a far more civilized collection of gentlemen and institutions. I call them the Baker Street Regulars. They, too, will be extremely useful in our work. At the start of any investigation, do keep in mind that it is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Unwittingly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. The people and places to whom I will now introduce you will help us to collect the facts. May we use them wisely. Come, the game's afoot.
Head clerk Disraeli O'Brien is your contact in the Office of Records. The Office of Records contains legal records, both criminal and civil, as well as state papers. I think you'll find O'Brien to be a walking, or should I say sitting encyclopedia of the office's affairs. Porky is not a pillar of society, I dare say, but he is a man who has learned from his mistakes and is trying to start a new life. Although he is no longer in prison, he is still behind bars, or shall I say, a bar.
Jolly good one, Holmes.
Yes, Watson. Well, the bar in question is the Raven and Rat Inn. Porky is the proprietor. He has been of great help to us in the past, and I expect he will continue to be in the future. Edward Hall is a young barrister whom you will find on most days at the Old Bailey. He's a cut above the other unimaginative members of his profession.
Holmes, don't you think you should explain to them the difference between a barrister and a solicitor?
Yes, of course, Watson. A solicitor handles the routine legal business of our society. If you do not have to go before a court, you will have no need for a barrister. If you must go before a court, then your solicitor would engage the services of a barrister. This is a records office housing documents pertaining to births, marriages, deaths, and last wills and testaments. Sir Jasper is the chief medical examiner for St. Bartholomew's Hospital. He is London's greatest forensic pathologist. You can depend on him for all the technical details that can be obtained from any corpse whose cause of death is in question. If I can't find something in my own files, I go and examine the overflowing shelves of the great London Library. It is a wealth of information. Quentin Hogg is a crime reporter for the Police Gazette. He is an ex-police inspector who found the environment of Scotland Yard less than stimulating. He has a strong deductive mind and is a very good resource. Now here is a person who usually gets in the last word. Langdale Pike is a human reference work on social scandal, especially on the London scene. He contributes bits of gossip to the garbage papers that cater to an inquisitive public. This gentleman is the head chemist at Scotland Yard Criminology Laboratory. It is rumored that Murray lives in the lab. He is eternally bent over one of his tables trying to extract the history of a crime from the physical evidence he's been given. You can learn much from old HR if you can follow the twists and jumps of his thinking. Mr. Henry Ellis is the foreign news editor for the London Times. He is a great reservoir of information of what's happening on the continent. He also has an interest in crime news. Ellis is always happy to help when he can, but you must be careful of what you tell him, or you might find what you've confided to him in the next day's Times. Ah, Scotland Yard. If the Yard knew how to examine evidence with any skill, there would be no need for our services. Inspector Lestrade is the pick of a bad lot. But it is true they may be a source of valuable information. After all, the professional police have methods for gathering facts that are not open to us.
What rubbish! What balderdash!
You must have read something terribly disturbing, Watson, for you to be so overwrought this early in the morning.
Indeed, Holmes. It's irresponsible of the Times to play upon people's superstitions.
Ah, you must be referring to the affair of the mummy's curse.
Has the entire city in an uproar. 3 men dead, and they expect us to believe that a 4,000-year-old mummy was the murderer. I'm surprised you haven't taken some interest in this case, Holmes.
To the contrary, my dear Watson. I have made some inquiries, because I dare say I do believe this murderer is a much younger chap.
It's quite amusing, all this hoopla over a mummy's curse, I must say. Not so amusing, of course, the murder of 3 Englishmen.
Have any of your reporters uncovered anything new?
Actually, I've been in Paris the past several weeks. Just returned to London on Tuesday. I've had no involvement with the writing of any of these articles. I believe they are all the work of Philip Travis. He's one of our young reporters. For a short time, he was the Egyptian correspondent.
Was he sacked?
No. He returned to London just a few days ago. I gather he was reassigned to cover the case from here because he had some familiarity with the murder in Egypt.
Do you know Travis?
No, never actually met the chap, although I hear he's a bit of an odd duck.
Thanks for your help, Henry.
Anytime. Let me know when you catch the mummy. That's one scoop I'd like to get.
Such a tragedy. Fine men all, and such outstanding scholars. I still can't quite get over the shock of it.
We understand.
Professor, we're looking for background information on these 3 men so that we can understand how their murders might tie together.
Well, let me begin with Dr. Turnbull. Ebenezer Turnbull was responsible for organizing the Carteret expedition. Quite a remarkable man, really. This was the first time he teamed up with James Windibank. Professor Windibank was one of our most popular lecturers. In fact, several of his former students were also eager to accompany him. I recall him saying that he was having difficulty choosing. Weatherby turned out to be the lucky one. Though it seems far from it now, doesn't it? I suppose Smith and Travis turned out to be the lucky ones after all.
Smith and Travis?
Peter Smith accepted the invitation to join another expedition. As for Philip Travis, he was quite keen on accompanying Professor Windibank. In fact, he became exceedingly upset when Andrew Weatherby, a postgraduate student in the department, was chosen instead. Took it rather personally, I should say.
I'm very sorry to intrude on you in your moment of grief.
Oh, that's quite all right. You know, Andrew and I haven't been married very long.
Long enough to know if he had any enemies?
Oh, Andrew was so unassuming. Everyone liked him.
Including Mr. Urubaru?
I really loved my husband.
I'm sure you did. Oh, English toffee. My favorite.
Would you like one?
Please.
Sorry. You'll have to open this yourself. I've never been any good with these things.
Hear ye, hear ye. The Queen's Court stands in order. Mr. Holmes, I understand you've been looking into the mummy murders.
Yes, my lord.
Tell me then, who was Ebenezer Turnbull's murderer?
I believe we're to choose from either our notebook or the directory, Holmes.
Very good, Watson.
And what makes you so certain? What was Travis's motive for killing Turnbull? And what of Andrew Weatherby? Who murdered him? So, you say Travis killed Turnbull and Weatherby?
Yes, I believe he did, my lord.
What was his motive to kill Weatherby, Holmes? Ah, revenge. The oldest motive in the book. Now, Holmes, who murdered James Windibank? This Travis seems to be quite a busy fellow. What made him kill James Windibank? Excellent job, gentlemen. You have solved the case to my satisfaction. The court stands in recess. Until next time, of course.
Well, Watson, I believe this case is solved. And for your information, it was not the mummy.
Come, Holmes. I never thought for a moment it was the mummy.
Of course not, Watson. However, the murderer and the mummy did have one thing in common.
What's that?
They both were the only ones present at the time of the murders, except, of course, the victims.
You state the obvious, Holmes.
Ah, but it is seeing the obvious that is important. First, I saw no reason to assume that we were dealing with more than one murderer. Secondly, the locations of the murders limited the number of suspects.
Limited them? The first murder was in Egypt, the second on ship in the middle of the sea, and the third in London. You call the entire populations of London and Egypt a limited number of suspects?
No, Watson. We had to find someone who was in Egypt for the first murder, on the ship for the second, and in London for the third.
Oh, but of course.
According to the newspapers, the Eastern Empress was in Bombay at the time of Ebenezer Turnbull's murder, so that eliminated the ship's crew as suspects. Thus, I needed the list of passengers who boarded the ship at Cairo. It was our visit to Jardine, Mason and Company that provided our first critical clue. From it, I learned that Philip Travis was a passenger. I then learned that Travis was the chap who reported on the first murder. He became one suspect, but I had no motive. Clarissa Weatherby, who was also at the scene of the murder in Cairo, was another possible suspect, since she appears to have had a bit of a dalliance with Mr. Uruburu there on the high seas. So I had found her motive for the murder of Weatherby, but not a motive for the murder of the others.
Then whom did you eliminate?
Mrs. Weatherby. Her hands were not strong enough even to open a jar of English toffee, let alone strangle a grown man.
And what of Travis's motive?
It seems that Travis was a student in the Egyptology department at London University and had studied under James Windibank. He wanted very badly to be chosen as a member of the expedition, but Windibank turned him down. Instead, Weatherby was chosen and Travis was furious. So there you have the motive for two of the murders.
And what of his motive for the murder of Turnbull?
Evidently, Travis had written a vicious article questioning Dr. Turnbull's credentials to lead the expedition. Turnbull's response was quite harsh, probably powerful enough to drive an odd duck like Travis to murder.
Very impressive, Holmes.
Elementary, my dear Watson.
Absolutely perfect. I'm quite sure we could not have done any better.
What rot!
Here is a passenger list you requested, sir.
Well, Holmes, I checked in with Mr. Al-Sad's manservant
And you discovered that Mr. Al-Sad was not at home.
But however did you know that?
Elementary, my dear Watson. I noticed some crumpet crumbs from the corner bakery stuck to your lapel. You haven't been gone long enough to stop for tea and interview anyone at length.
Most observant.
Hello? Is anyone there? Mr. Harmony, are you at home?
Apparently so, Watson. Look.
Oh, what ghastly business. Everyone will assume the mummy has struck again.
Hardly a plausible assumption. This poor fellow has a knife in his back and not a scrap of sheeting about his neck.
How very observant, Holmes.
Ring up Scotland Yard. This case is simple enough for them to solve.
You've solved it already.
Elementary, my dear Watson. Obviously, it was the butler.
Butler? What butler?
Exactly my point. A man as wealthy as Akram Fahmy would always have a manservant about him. After the foul deed, this one obviously beat a hasty retreat.
I'm sorry, but I don't know anything about the death of old... whatever his name was.
Andrew Weatherby.
Fact is, I only saw the gentleman once, just as we were boarding. And I'll tell you, I resented the first officer's questioning us on the matter, and I resent yours.
The whole voyage was a disaster from beginning to end. Our accommodations were positively abysmal. They wouldn't even let us bring Dickie into our cabin.
Dickie?
A high-strung, distasteful little mutt.
How can you say that, Merrill? You know Dickie is a blue-blooded Yorkshire Terrier. Mumsy will be with you in just a moment, Dickiekins. He's a bit under the weather, you know. That's why we were only able to stay in Egypt for 2 weeks. Dickie was so disappointed. He so wanted to see the Sphinx.
Mr. Holmes is not interested in your incessant whining, Louise.
Oh, now I whine, do I? There was a time you thought I had a lovely speaking voice. It's true, Mr. Holmes. He once adored me.
No doubt.
Oh, for the love of God, Louise, spare us your blubbering.
Now, the thing what does strike me as odd is the passenger list of the Eastern Empress. Now, I'm not saying it has anything to do with the mummy murders, mind you, but it was a bit out of the ordinary.
What was Hogg?
Akram Palmi, for starters. He's a well-known importer, he is. For a price, a considerable price by all accounts, he can acquire whatever one's heart desires, be it jewels, art objects, or even wild animals, if that's what you fancy. I'd say he was on board that ship to transport something very valuable.
The presence of one high-powered importer on a London-bound vessel is hardly reason for suspicion.
Right-o. But Abdullah al-Saad was also on board.
Oh, yes. The well-known agent for the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire.
You never miss a trick, do you, Holmes? Well, whatever it was what Palmi was carrying, I'd say it was something those Turks wanted to get their hands on.
Here it is, Holmes. Egyptian mummies are embalmed bodies preserved to facilitate their resurrection. Many mummies have been found, and they are almost always the bodies of pharaohs. The pharaohs believed that one day their bodies would be brought back to life. See History of Egyptian Mummies by Pettigrew, London, 1834.
Very good, Watson.
Beg your pardon, but could I have a word with you, Sir Jasper?
Dr. Watson, of course. Are you investigating the death of Samuel Sneed? I just finished with him.
No, we're interested in James Windibank.
Ah, the mummy's latest victim, of course. Who hired Holmes for this one? King Tut?
Oh, that's a jolly good one. Actually, we don't have a client on this one.
Just for fun, eh? Well, about the only thing I can tell you is that mummy has very powerful hands.
What do you mean?
The trachea was crushed along with one of the vertebrae of the neck. Death was instantaneous. Snap.
But the paper's reports say that there were mummy wrappings found round the neck.
Just window dressing. Without question, it was bare hands. The bruises and the way that the vertebrae was crushed leave no doubt about that.
Thank you very much for your time, Sir Jasper. We're very much appreciative.
Not at all, Watson. You will let me know when you've convicted the mummy.
Beg your pardon?
Well, so I can perform an autopsy on him. Would be most fascinating, don't you think?
Pettigrew wrote this book over 50 years ago, and there's still nothing better on the subject. Fascinating. Just fascinating. And what can I do for you today, Whitson?
It's Watson, sir.
Watson, yes, of course.
We're interested in what you may have learned about this mummy case.
Oh, so these days it's mummies you're chasing down with that fella Holmes.
It's Holmes, sir.
That's just what I said now, isn't it, Whitson?
Yes, I believe you did, sir.
Let me show you what I found so far. This is the bit of linen that was found round the neck of James Windibank. I examined it thoroughly, and it is quite old, perhaps thousands of years. However, it is not the murder weapon.
Are you certain of that?
Aye. The linen is quite old, but it's not at all strong enough to strangle a grown man.
Very interesting, sir.
I also found something quite fascinating. Take a look through this glass. Do you see those short hairs on the fabric?
They look precisely like hairs.
Of course they look like hairs. But what kind of hairs? They're not human hairs. They're dog hairs. Now, look at this. This piece of linen was found round the neck of the victim on board the ship. Well, his name was Leatherby or something. It is also quite old, and on it I found more hairs.
More dog hairs?
No, my dear man, monkey hairs. I've not yet been able to identify the precise species, but it's just extraordinary, isn't it?
Quite. But what do you think it all means?
Well, I'm not the sort who likes to jump to conclusions, Whitson. But I can assure you that neither of these bandages were the murder weapons.
We had just come through a rather grueling storm, so I sent my first officer, Luther Tenney, down into the hold to check on the condition of the cargo. He reported back post-haste that Mr. Weatherby was lying dead among the Egyptian artifacts we were transporting. I turned over the helm to Tenney and went below to have a look for myself.
And did what you see confirm Teddy's report?
Unfortunately, yes. Weatherby was lying next to that coffin, or whatever it's called, apparently strangled. I went back to the bridge and put Tenney in charge of the investigation.
And what did he uncover?
Well, you'll have to ask him for the specifics, because I can scarcely recall the details.
There was a couple of blokes in here just a fortnight ago what mentioned the Eastern Empress. Never seen 'em before, haven't seen 'em since. One was a swarthy fellow, Arab unless I miss my guess. The other was an old English gent. I overheard 'em say something about a bird and later caught the name of the ship. I hope that helps you. Care for a drink, huh?
Let me tell you, a murder, even by a 4,000-year-old mummy, was only one odd thing in a string of bad luck on this voyage.
What sort of bad luck?
It all started with the crew, really. Seamen were a rather superstitious lot to begin with, and the idea of carrying about a 4,000-year-old mummy had them shivering in their timbers. We almost faced a bloody mutiny. Then there were the passengers, a strange lot. I can tell you that reporter fellow, Travis, did us no service at all with his mystic mumbo-jumbo. He and Professor Winterbank had a regular war of words going on about whatever powers this mummy was supposed to have. And there was the two Arabs.
Arabs? Interesting. Do you recall their names?
I should hope I do. One was called Barmy. He always carried around this curious little box. No clue what was in it, but Barmy never let it out of his sight. The other one's name was Al Sard, and he spent most of his time lurking about watching Barmy. My guess is he wanted that box.
Sounds like you had your hands full.
I haven't even told you about the fight yet between Mr. Weatherby and Mr. Arubaru.
Over what?
Weatherby's wife, I'd say, though they were a tight-lipped lot about it.
I see. Tell me, Lieutenant, we understand that you were the first person to discover the body.
Yes, sir, I was. Captain Ramsey sent me down to inspect the hold. And I went immediately over to them Egyptian crates. Professor Winterbank was particularly anxious about him, you know.
Could you describe the scene as you remember it?
I'll never forget it. I just made my way to the back of the hold, and I noticed at the top of them crates, the one what carried the mummy's coffin was raised up kind of funny like. The coffin lid's laid off to one side, and there was Mr. Weatherby, all sprawled on the floor next to a bowl of ashes. He'd been strangled by a length of the mummy's sheeting. Bloody gruesome, I tell you. Poor bloke's eyes popped out like a couple of sausages on a hot iron skillet.
Quite a vivid picture, don't you agree, Holmes?
Quite. And you reported this to Captain Ramsay straight away?
Absolutely. In fact, the captain put me in charge of the entire investigation.
And what did you discover? Did anybody have any contact with Weatherby on the night of the murder?
Not that I know of. I could account for all the crew. And the passengers were in their cabins as far as anyone knew or would say. Nobody saw anything, heard anything, or knew anything. Besides, Weatherby was seasick from the beginning. He stayed pretty much in his cabin all the time. Maybe that's why the lovely young Mrs. Weatherby was gallivanting about.
With Uruburu?
Yes, indeed.
And what of the bowl? Where is it now?
The bowl?
With the ashes.
Oh, yes. You know, now that you mention it, I don't recall ever seeing it again.
So you've been reading my articles in the Times. I'm honored. What do you think of them?
Quite interesting. You've clearly been following the murders quite closely. Who do you suspect?
I believe it is the work of the ancient Egyptian god Pumatef and his goddess Neith.
Be serious.
I couldn't be more serious. You see, Mr. Holmes, although I am a journalist, I was actually trained as an Egyptologist. I know all about these mysteries. That's why my articles carry the force of truth.
And what is the truth, Mr. Travis?
The truth is that the Egyptians discovered the secret of life. What we call science is mere child's play compared to the knowledge they had. Look at this. Do you know what this is?
It appears to be a mummified animal of some sort. A monkey, perhaps?
Precisely.
Quite a conversation piece.
I've been using it in some very important experiments which, if successful, will unlock the secret to bringing back the souls of the dead. I've been working on it, Mr. Holmes, using these tanner leaves. Watch. Uma lotus. Licantina. Burura.
It appears that the soul of this particular monkey has no intention of making a reappearance.
It's only a matter of time. I know it is. After all, these secrets have been buried for thousands of years. These things don't happen overnight. But it will happen someday. This is my mission.
I believe I'll leave you to your work, Mr. Travis.
Don't go yet. Let me show you more.
Thank you. Some other time, perhaps. If this is an inconvenient time, perhaps I could come back, Mr. Uruburu.
I wouldn't hear of it. Just a bit of a hangover. I've weathered plenty worse than this.
I'm investigating the death of Andrew Weatherby. You were on the ship with him out of Cairo. Did you happen to make his acquaintance?
Weatherby, a most tedious fellow.
So tedious, one might want to do him in.
Don't be preposterous. In my condition, I couldn't have done anything of the sort.
What condition was that?
And I thought you were a great detective. The first night out, a few of us threw a bit of a bash that went on until we docked in London.
Did Mrs. Weatherby attend this particular bash?
She was the guest of honor, you might say.
James was so thrilled when Dr. Turnbull invited him to join the expedition. He felt he had spent his entire life reading books about archaeology, and now was finally getting an opportunity to go out into the field.
Tell me, Mrs. Winterberg, when your husband returned, did he discuss the deaths of his colleagues?
Of course. James was extremely upset. I know he did not believe a curse to be responsible. My husband was a man of science.
Well, well, if it isn't Mr. Sherlock Holmes, London's most overly praised amateur sleuth, needing the help of the yard again.
Are you going to stand for that, Holmes?
Let's just see who proceeds to solve this case, Watson. Inspector Lestrade, my good man, I'm looking into the cause of James Winterbank's death.
I should have known. That murder has brought out every crank in the city. I think the professional police can wrap this one up.
All the same, could you tell us what you've discovered to date?
One dead archaeologist, no suspect, no motive.
And what of Andrew Weatherby's death? Have you looked into that?
I have talked to Captain Ramsey, but we have no leads. Look, I'm not even sure that Weatherby's murder falls into our jurisdiction. And if it doesn't, you're not going to find me worrying about it. As it is, I have enough murders to take care of.
Sorry, fellows. I don't mean to be brusque, but I am too occupied at the moment to concern myself with these so-called mummy murders. Perhaps if the mummy's solicitor were to contact me, then perhaps I would consider defending him.
I know only a very little about two of the unfortunate gentlemen. I do recall that Turnbull was quite an eccentric chap. I don't believe he ever married, nor did he take his rightful place in London society.
And what of Windybank?
A quiet academic sort, as far as I can tell. Married to a woman called Hildegard. There was one spot of controversy that I can recall. It seems a few years back he had a run-in with the Anti-Vivisectionist League.
No, but of course.
It seems that during a lecture on the advancement of science, he spoke of the autopsy of his own pet, a recently deceased Yorkshire Terrier. Well, I can tell you the Times received a great deal of letters to the editor condemning him on that one. Even one from a Louise Fenwick, who threatened to vivisect him.
Oh, dear. Well, then I surmise it's Weatherby you know nothing about.
Well, now that you mention it, I believe he was assisting Professor Windybank in that lecture series.
Mr. Turnbull apparently left what little he had to the Egyptology department at London University. And Windybank left everything to his wife Hildegard.
What about Weatherby?
Ditto. Everything was left to his wife Clarissa, although being such a young chap, it hardly seems that he had much to leave at all.